Governor Pritzker will be telling us his budget plans, and the Illinois Supreme Court is losing a bear. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. With me here today, Kent Redfield is back, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Illinois Springfield. Welcome back, Kent.
Good to be here.
And Rebecca Anzel, State House reporter, Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome back.
Thank
Rebecca. So we have a budget address coming up next week.
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, Governor Pritzker will be telling us his plans. Unlike some of the advance notices of his speeches, sometimes he gives hints as to what we might hear. I don't think we've heard a lot of hints, but Kent, you've watched budgets for 1 or 2 years now.
Yeah, and the governor has, a problem because of in the last budget, he was talking about this is how we're going to get the pension debt paid off. This is how we're going to do the unpaid bills, increase state spending, particularly funding education, and to make all of that work. Step 1 and 2 were marijuana and expanded gambling to get revenues to get us to the most important part, which is the graduated income tax. But that doesn't become official unless the voters approve it in the fall.
Yeah, the legislature last year passed a constitutional amendment, but voters have to approve that next November.
And so you're supposed to present a budget based on available revenues. You're not supposed to assume things that might come online. And so he can talk about this is doom in terms of, this is how we'd have to struggle through without getting the increased revenue from the graduate income tax. Or he can paint a rosy picture of all of these great things that are going to happen with this increased revenue. You're going to get a lot of objections from particularly the Republican side if he doesn't do a budget based on existing revenue. And the problems are significant in terms of we put off paying down the unpaid bills, the pension debt. Last year he was talking about extending the time to the ramp to pay off the unfunded liability and then pull that back because they got an increase in revenue.
Yeah, they got a big windfall of money that they didn't expect in some tax receipts.
Yeah, great to have a budget, great to have a nice plan about how we can make things better, but it is really contingent on what happens with that with the graduated income tax. And we've seen governors in the past kind of hedge their bets, and here's the good budget and the bad budget. But ultimately, the legislature is going to have to pass something. Could even just be a 6-month budget.
Right. Rebecca, one of the other things that's apparently going to happen next week is Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, is going to come down. This has happened before, but I think the last time she visited the legislature, she talked to Democrats as a group, but not Republicans, and then didn't get what she wanted. One of the things being, I think, a change in tax law for how a Chicago casino would have to be taxed because they think it's too expensive under the current plan.
A consultant agrees with the city too that it's too high. It might not attract investors for a casino or whatever. Anyway. When she came, she did only come and she spoke with Democrats. The veto session is 2 weeks. She came in the second week and expected to get a casino change, which didn't happen. To her credit, the first week of veto session was the teacher strike, so she couldn't really leave the city for that. But when she's coming, she's going to be speaking with House Republicans and Senate Democrats, probably meet with the new Senate President, Don Harmon. And I'm sure she and other Chicago representatives are hoping for that tax for a Chicago casino to change.
Right, which of course would make it generate less money, but still, we're with all of the new gambling that got passed, we still haven't seen the new casinos being built. I mean, there are plans being made in various cities, and sports betting also got approved, and I did hear just a radio report within the last day or so that, at least a couple locations, I think the Alton Casino, they expect to be ready for March Madness. So everything has to gear up, and this is partly because the state had to generate the rules under which these new laws would operate. But it's a complicated thing to move forward with these things.
Yes, and if you open up the law and you're making changes that are favorable to the city of Chicago, then the reaction in the suburbs and downstate with existing and hoped for casinos is going to be, what about us? And so that's always the danger, is that you can load these things up with everybody wants a special deal, a piece of the pie, whatever it happens to be. And so now there are certainly, because we now have a budget, we have a capital plan, the governor has more tools to work with in terms of trying to satisfy people, but there will be a lot of pressure to get some things, if people don't want to be accused of, voting to help Chicago without helping, Union County or Sangamon County or Rockford or Winnebago or what have you. And so it will be an interesting dance with, again, a governor in a second term and a mayor that's been there less than a year or about a year now, and now a new Senate president. These things are always complicated, and it's hard to know what exactly is going to come out of it.
And as Senator Terry Link of Waukegan would tell you, and did very emotionally say last year, we finally got a gambling bill passed to allow more casinos in Illinois after we did riverboats and after we did gambling in bars and restaurants over the last several years. But these 5 or 6 new casinos going in around the state was a massive undertaking. Waukegan, or that area, will supposed to get one, and Terry Link, because of various legal troubles that he has found himself in, is no longer even leading the charge for the next phase. But any changes again, these things always got bogged down with everybody's wants.
And having a new point person for the Senate Democrats, again, is just one more thing that everybody has to get comfortable. So this will be an interesting negotiation.
Well, it will, and we will keep an eye. So a announcement came out this last week from the Illinois Supreme Court that Bob Thomas, not exactly a household name in Springfield. We don't watch the Supreme Court, not everybody perhaps as closely as others, but he is from DuPage County. He is was elected to the court as a Republican. He's been on it a couple of decades at least, and as of the end of February, he is leaving. The court has appointed someone in his place named Michael Burke, who is not related to Ann Burke, who is a Democrat from Chicago and Chief Justice right now. But Bob Thomas is known for other stuff because he was a kicker with the Chicago Bears. So just changes coming to the court.
It is indeed. One thing to note is Justice Thomas's term ends in 2020. His replacement, Michael Burke, is going to be serving till 2022. And whether Justice Thomas timed it this way or not, because his retirement comes less than 60 days before the primary, which is on St. Patrick's Day this year, his replacement had to have their term through to the next judicial election.
Right. So it's
well, I mean, that means that instead of having a competitive election now with a district that is kind of outside of Cook County, northeastern Illinois, but a district that has been swinging more Democratic, it could have been a very contentious and expensive contest, Democrats versus Republicans, for the Democrats looking to pick up a seat on the Supreme Court. That's not going to happen now. We'll put this off a year. The third district, which is below Cook County in northeastern Illinois and is kind of from the Quad Cities, all the way over to the Indiana border, that justice, who is Kilbride,
Tom Kilbride.
He's been retained once, so he's been on the court for 20 years. He will be on the ballot for retention, and that is just a yes/no, and you have to get 60%. And we have had contentious retentions in the past. 10 years ago, Kilbride had a lot of opposition. I think maybe 8 years or 12 years ago, a bunch of trial lawyers put together a $2 million independent expenditure program and put it out there about less than a month before the election and almost denied him retention. And so, there's a possibility that that might be in play. And
he's a Democrat in an area that I think a lot of his territory is kind of went. It's interesting if you talk about that part of the state, the western edge. Like Sherry Bustos is the congressperson from there, a Springfield native, but her district was won by President Trump, but she's a Democrat that won election to Congress. So, and there's some overlap of those districts, and we're going to see a lot of enthusiasm, perhaps on both sides of the aisle in this November election, because you have President Trump on the ballot and whoever the Democrat is.
And the justice from the deep southern Illinois district, which was Carmeier, he's retiring. So now we have a Democrat who is a member of a prominent trial lawyer firm running, will run against whoever wins out of the Republican side of the primary. So that'll be contested in the fall. But the only minority member of the court is stepping down, Justice Freeman. From Chicago. And now we have a six-way primary going on, which will be the election on the Democratic side, because this is, it's only Cook County.
Right.
The appointed person is African American. There are two other African Americans. There are also a Latino and two Caucasians running, and so you could end up with no longer having any minorities on the Supreme Court, although you will still have two women. Three.
Rita Garman represents the 4th district, which includes Sangamon County,
and Thea Sinberg
from is it Danville?
So there are some interesting things on what normally people don't pay a lot of attention to, which is Supreme Court elections.
So one thing to note about Justice Thomas is he's leaving to work at the firm called Power Rogers. That is the firm that represented him in a defamation suit in 2006 against the Kane County Chronicle. Justice Thomas won. Speaking with somebody who said that Justice Thomas leaving for that post would almost be like Justice Carmeier retiring and going to work for State Farm. So to refresh viewers' memories, it was kind of alleged that State Farm sort of installed Justice Carmeier with all of the financial backing they gave to legal nonprofits in the state. And then a year after he got elected, so in 2005, he sided with 4 other justices in the majority so that State Farm sort of got out of a $1 billion fine, which is not related. We're not alleging anything, but the optics are not super great.
And just irony on top of irony, Powers Rogers, and it used to be Powers Rogers and Smith, is one of the top trial lawyer firms in the state, one of the mega firms.
That's Joe Power, right?
Yeah, and so normally when we have battles over Supreme Court elections, in addition to being Democrat versus Republican, it's also tort reform versus trial lawyers sorts of things. And so for a Republican judge to be going to work, leaving the bench and then going to work for a large plaintiff's law firm, if you will, is interesting.
But the other part of that story is Justice Thomas has a son that works for that firm, so he'll be joining his son. And the other thing that I do say about Justice, I remember when he was a kicker for the Chicago Bears, he left the team, I believe, after the '84 season, after 10 years, and then they won the Super Bowl in '85, so he almost got there, but then he did get to the Supreme Court, so that's not too bad.
And he's still the 4th highest scorer.
Is it 4th or 3rd?
4th.
Okay, well, you seem to know this better than I do, so that is good. Okay, well, moving on. The Illinois primary, as you mentioned, Rebecca, is on St. Patrick's Day this year, March 17th. Obviously, we know where the Republican Party is because Donald Trump is the nominee, and even Joe Walsh, a former Illinois congressman who has now dropped out of the presidential race, who was running against the president of his own party for a while, is no longer there. But on the Democratic side, it'll come after Super Tuesday. Lots of states will have voted, but right now, as we are looking at it from this angle, Illinois might be important this year on the Democratic side because nobody knows what's happening in that race. Michael Bloomberg has opened offices across the state, including in Springfield. He will be on the ballot in Illinois. You've got this Amy Klobuchar moving up. You've got Pete Buttigieg. You've got Bernie Sanders. So Illinois could matter this year, which might make our primary more interesting than some years.
One of the things that you've been seeing is that Michael Bloomberg is, sees this opportunity, and it almost looks a little bit like Governor Pritzker running in the primary, putting a lot of money into media, a lot of money into organizing, and that's certainly the way you want to do it, but it takes an incredible amount of money. And if you were watching TV Tuesday night, which I happened to be doing as I was working on a project and back and forth between a bunch of things, including...
You don't really believe in this retirement thing, do you? Yeah. But anyway, go ahead.
The Illini game. I saw at least 4, maybe 5 commercials featuring what seemed to be an endorsement by Barack Obama of Michael Bloomberg. Now, it was him talking, if you understood the context, it was about Bloomberg's work in terms of gun control legislation, but it certainly was crafted so it looked like that Obama had
noticed that, and
him.
I have actually wondered why I don't hear more reaction from people saying, how can he use Obama in this way when Obama has not endorsed in the presidential primary?
Yeah. So Bloomberg really believes that he has an opportunity, and that and so he's willing to spend the money, and this is. If he keeps doing this between now and the primary day, this will be an incredible amount of money to put into one state.
I think he's already spent $250 million or $300 or so nationwide. What's funny is some of the Democrats who are running for president are very negative about people with that you can call billionaires, and certainly Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have basically used billionaires as a punching bag in what they do. Well, we also have in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, our governor, is a billionaire, but only about 3 times. And he was able to run against a very wealthy Republican incumbent, and he was able to advertise at will. He was able to claim truly that he was funding his own campaign, so he wasn't counting on any special interest. He was just doing what he believed. So there are negatives about people with money, and there are positives about people with money. Kent, you've been watching this for a long time. I mean, money helps in a campaign.
It is the reality. I mean, you can't necessarily buy an election, but you can lose an election. I mean, in terms of people without money don't win elections. And so the other thing that's interesting is the March primary is designed, or it's worked out to advantage organized political parties, because it's in March. There's not a lot of things going on. If you've got an organization activity, and now you're going to have, if it's a hot presidential race, you will have all of these different candidates, and plus Bloomberg and his money bringing more people to the polls, and maybe not what looks like the usual kind of party-dominated primary electorate.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to me who among our political leaders in Illinois are going for who. Joe Biden has been quite popular with some, people certainly in central Illinois. Bill Houlihan is a state central committeeman. He had talked about knowing Biden for a long time and yet Biden didn't do well in New Hampshire and didn't do well in Iowa, and is hoping to come back in South Carolina, and then Super Tuesday, but we're still a long way away. And then Elizabeth Warren, our state treasurer, Mike Frericks, early on said Elizabeth Warren was the candidate he wanted to see. So there's going to clearly be a realignment, or it looks like there'll be a realignment in all of these allegiances as we move forward. So we'll see where it goes. The Illinois Education Association this week released some survey results about people's view of education in the state, and a couple of things that I noticed from the results where most people would give, or I guess public schools in general get a C-, and yet this is kind of like your legislator. The legislature's bad, but local public schools get an A or a B. And more than half of the people polled, interestingly, thought teachers are paid too little. A lot of the people who are the anti-government or pro-taxpayer groups in Illinois always say teachers are paid too much. We just passed a bill last year in the legislature that is raising teacher pay to a minimum of $40,000, I think by 2023-ish. And yet, people there's a teacher shortage, and maybe more pay is an answer. So, the union is making this point.
And also to your point about the legislature, the poll seemed to indicate that school financing, there needs to be some sort of school reform, and the poll gave no clear consensus as to how to fix some of the issues that voters see. much like the legislature.
Yeah, and that's been a problem forever, right, Ken? As Illinois only pays about, the state only pays about a quarter of school costs right now, and the Constitution says that they should be the predominant funder, and that hasn't happened in a long time.
No, and we are on the lower end in terms of the amount of state support that we give to schools, but we are this funding is dominated by local property taxes, and that's and we have very, very high, compared to other states, property taxes. And so fixing schools and fixing schools funding gets you all tied up in how the state raises money and where the local share comes from. And we are in the process through the new evidence-based funding
which was passed last year,
to get new money to schools with the highest need, but that takes a long period.
Actually, it was passed 2 years ago, but it's enforced.
They'll take a long time for that because it's only the new money. We're not distributing the old money in terms of this, and so when there's pressure for immediate fixes in terms of reducing property taxes, in terms of taking care of the unfunded liability, we don't have a lot of options. Our sales taxes are, the rate is pretty high. The base could be much broader if we would.
We don't tax services in
but
general,
the governor
like many states do.
is opposed to that.
And we don't tax retirement income, but it's kind of the third rail when you talk about that, and the governor said that's off limits too.
Yeah, so it is a real problem in terms of how you get all of these pieces together.
Yeah, and the governor has talked about wanting, as many people, we need to reduce property taxes, which of course property taxes are levied and collected at the local level. So in order to do that, you need more state funding, which will relieve the pressure on local governments. But I guess we'll see in the budget speech next week if there's any actual answers to this. I don't know, because it's a very difficult problem. So another interesting situation is that we're in 2020. This is the year that soon people will start hearing from the U.S. Census Bureau to count everybody in Illinois. There's a lot of money being spent by state and local governments to try to get people to fill out those forms, because census data is what determines how much government money comes to a city or for your roads or for your social service programs. But census also will be used, the information collected this year, to draw new political maps that will go into effect in 2022, new legislative districts, new congressional districts. Illinois may lose a congressional seat, but a number of legislators have had press conferences in a few cities calling for fair maps, calling for a commission instead of a legislature to draw maps. And Rebecca, how's that looking?
So there are 6 other proposals about redistricting. This one, there's the measure in the House, and the Senate's the same thing. Seems to be the most comprehensive. There are phrases that are defined, which other proposals lack. And yes, there's 9 lawmakers all had kind of coordinated press conferences on Thursday, all to espouse that theirs is the most fair. There's a commission. Its members are going to be representative of the demographics of Illinois, the racial makeup, the language makeup. At least 2 commissioners have to be per judicial district, so it'll be spread out. This is like the California model, basically.
And Kent, people have tried for a long time to get and this would be a constitutional amendment, right, Rebecca? Right. People have tried to get constitutional amendments on the ballot for fair maps. The governor has said he would veto any map that's not fair, but you also have a very democratic legislature, the House and Senate. The governor's a Democrat. What do you think the odds are of getting a constitutional amendment on the ballot this year to change this process?
Yeah, and we've tried citizens initiative. That did not work in terms of what people thought that they needed to do and what the court was willing to accept. So this would have to be placed on the ballot by both chambers of the legislature voting to set it on the ballot for this fall, just like we did the graduate income tax. There is a window there in which this has to be done, because it has to be in place so many months before
6 months.
Before the general election. And the odds are probably, if I had to guess, we'll probably get and it has to be identical.
Right.
So if we get one version passed by the House, sent to the Senate, another version passed by the Senate, sent to the House, everybody gets to vote for a new map. But then we never really get to the point.
This happens on a lot of issues where everybody wants to take credit for telling their people I voted for this, but it didn't really happen because it doesn't go to the governor.
Yeah, and
or actually in the constitutional amendment, it doesn't have to go to the governor.
Yeah.
But if it's not the same, it just won't get to the ballot.
Yeah, and so I am doubtful that we're going to be voting on adopting a redistricting commission that's going to draw the maps for 2022. I think we'll have the old process. The Democrats will draw a map, and each chamber will draw the map they like. They'll put them together, and then we'll see what the negotiations look like with the governor. And the same process, it doesn't involve the governor, but let's see, he has to sign a piece of legislation. We're going to draw new congressional maps with one less member of the House, and we'll have one less member of the House, and there's no movement to set up some kind of alternative mechanism in terms of congressional.
Right.
What we're talking about here is just the state map.
And whatever the map is, it doesn't guarantee who wins, but it can certainly help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Representative Ryan Spain is from Peoria. He held one of the press conferences on Thursday. I asked him, he has been sponsoring these redistricting amendments for years, and this one that everybody is supporting is being sponsored by Representative Tara Costa Howard from Lombard. And I said to him, why did you give up the sponsorship? And he said, what? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether my name is on it. He wants to see it. And Representative Howard is a Democrat.
Okay.
So
we'll see.
We might see.
Yeah, it still might be tough for the majority Democrats to give it up. Kent Redfield, Rebecca Anzel, thanks for your thoughts. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.